A little note on Trump before we dive into what's going on here in Downing Street. We haven't heard or seen much about the Trump-Starmer conversation. Many people tell me that everything's fine, that there's absolutely no problem at all, and that the fact Starmer wasn't invited to the inauguration doesn't matter. But it kind of does, because he's already behind several world leaders who've had conversations with Trump. There used to be a race to be the first person to speak with the new president. Starmer has already lost that. Starmer's international humiliation is complete. Trump's brutal snub has sent shockwaves through Britain. We're witnessing one of the greatest political collapses of our time. Starmer, once hailed as the so-called future of British politics, is now completely humiliated on the world stage. And the final blow has come from none other than Donald J. Trump. That's right, Trump, the former U.S. president who reshaped global politics, has flat out refused to meet with Starmer. But let's be clear, this wasn't just a simple snub. It wasn't a quiet, behind-the-scenes rejection. No, this was brutal. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing but makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. You say you want to be open with people, but some will think you weren't honest during the election campaign. So, if you're being honest, can you tell them now? The fallout begins. Can Starmer survive this disaster? Now, Starmer finds himself in complete freefall, desperately scrambling to fix the damage. His advisors are in panic mode. His party members are whispering behind closed doors. The media is circling like vultures. The question on everyone's mind, can Starmer survive this international humiliation, or has he just triggered the beginning of the end for his leadership and possibly the Labour Party itself? It's hard to expect a £22 billion black hole. Those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heaviest burden. Those who made the mess should have to do their part to clean it up. Just adding to what I said about the prisons crisis, I feel very strongly about this. Having to gauge every day those disorders when people are trying to burn down hotels, it's a lot to handle. I've had to look at lists of prison places. Stick around, because we're breaking it all down. How did it all go so wrong? The Starmer collapse. It wasn't that long ago that Starmer was being hailed as the man who could bring Labour back to power. Remember, he had the credentials former human rights lawyer, director of public prosecutions, someone who, at least on paper, looked like he could restore order to a party in chaos. When he became Labour leader, the left thought they had a winner. The United States and France are Britain's biggest allies. If you become Prime Minister, there could be a world in which Trump and Marine Le Pen are in office. How would you feel about that? It's for voters in America and France to decide who they want as their leaders. If I'm privileged enough to come into office, I'll deal with the leaders of other countries as they've been elected by their people. The media formed an image of him competent, serious, a man with a safe pair of hands. But here's the thing about politics, it's not about looking the part. You either deliver or you crumble. Starmer has crumbled. At first, the warning signs were small. His policies lacked clarity, his speeches uninspiring. But then the cracks turned into massive, gaping holes. And now, those holes have completely swallowed his credibility. We know the Labour government hasn't exactly been positive about Donald Trump in the past. Ministers have called him a racist, a misogynist, a white supremacist, a KKK sympathizer, all the insults under the sun. So, surprise, surprise, it's been reported that Starmer is planning to deploy King Charles in a last-ditch attempt to win over Donald Trump. I wish him the very best of luck, because Trump didn't even invite Starmer to his inauguration. His flip-flopping on Brexit angered both sides of the debate. His failure to manage Labour's internal divisions left his own MPs questioning his leadership. His disconnect with working-class voters caused Labour's traditional base to abandon him. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has damaged him more than his catastrophic approach to international relations. this isn't just about one misstep. It's about a total lack of leadership, vision, and political instinct. And now, we've reached the tipping point. Starmer's failed power play. So, what was the mistake that led to this disaster? Donald Trump, particularly, loved the late Queen Elizabeth. He did have a state visit where he met the Queen and spent a few days with her. Well, now we're seeing a move from Starmer, but I think Starmer should probably take a look at himself. Not being invited to the inauguration, despite the fact that so many other foreign leaders have been, what a colossal miscalculation. It turned Starmer into an international laughingstock. It all started when he decided to wade into U.S. politics, openly attacking Trump and endorsing his Democratic rivals. Why would an opposition leader in Britain, who isn't even prime minister, stick his nose into an American election? Starmer thought he was playing smart politics. He thought he was aligning himself with the future. By cozying up to the Democrats, he believed he was making a strategic move. But now, he's going to will out the royal family, which might be a sensible move. We know Trump loves the royals. This was one of the worst strategic errors in British political history, and here's how it completely backfired. Trump never forgets. If there's one thing about Trump, it's that he remembers every slight. Starmer underestimated him. He thought the former U.S. president would move on. Instead, Trump made it crystal clear that Starmer was not welcome. Public humiliation on the world stage. During Trump's visit to the UK, Starmer attempted to reach out. He wanted a private meeting, a chance to mend fences. But it wasn't just behind closed doors. Trump let the world see it. Politically, it's fascinating. The big headlines this morning: the U.S. exacting revenge on Starmer's government with their secret weapon, David Lammy. That worries me. Also, Nigel Farage is loving this. I don't quite understand the strategy from Starmer and the Labour Party. It's a public humiliation, deliberate, and not just a personal embarrassment. This is a full-scale diplomatic disaster. Britain cringes, and Starmer looks weak and powerless. The British public watched it unfold. They saw Starmer stumble, fumble, and look completely out of his depth. The leader of the Labour Party, rejected on live television. For a moment, you could almost hear the collective groan of embarrassment across Britain. The consequences? UK-US relations are in jeopardy. Trump's rejection of Starmer isn't just a bad headline, it's a diplomatic earthquake. It's a shameful day that our Prime Minister hasn't been invited. Nigel Farage will be there. Boris Johnson will be there. Salah was at the airport yesterday, and so were others, including Liz Truss. The UK's special relationship with the US has been one of the most important pillars of global politics for decades, but that relationship is now on the brink of collapse. Trade deals are in jeopardy. Without Trump's backing, Britain's ability to negotiate strong trade agreements could take a serious hit. Security cooperation is at risk. The US has always shared intelligence with the UK, but with Starmer now frozen out, there are serious concerns that this cooperation could weaken Britain's global standing. Other world leaders are now questioning whether Starmer is even capable of leading on the international stage. The people of the UK have shown great support for me, especially when they were doing that ridiculous thing a couple of months ago. The people of the UK have shown such great support. I love the people of the UK. My mother was born in Scotland. Here's where things get interesting. While Starmer is floundering, another political figure is stepping in: Nigel Farage, Britain's true link to Washington. Farage has a close relationship with Trump. In fact, he was the first foreign politician to visit Trump after his 2016 victory. Now, Farage is making moves behind the scenes, positioning himself as Britain's true link to Washington. Talk to me a bit about the special relationship between the UK and the US. Where is that right now under the Starmer government, and where would you like it to be? Well, obviously, with a Labour government, you're always going to have problems, but we have a deeper relationship regardless of the political party. There's always going to be a deep bond between the UK and the US. But with Farage as Prime Minister, it could go to the next level. Panicking, you might say that in theory, it's a good idea. Can this Labour government do that? Because if they can't, surely the Trump presidency is a very bad thing for the UK, especially for the UK economy. Well, I mean, you'd argue the same if we were still part of the European Union, and this may give Starmer, our Prime Minister, a slight dilemma. Does he do what's right for us, or does he do what Brussels tells him to do? What happens next? Starmer's leadership is in peril. As the dust settles, his future is in serious doubt. Let's break it down. He's lost credibility on the world stage. He's made Labour look weak and amateurish. He's given the Tories and Farage a massive advantage. And now, with the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit coming up, Starmer faces his biggest test yet. Can he repair the damage? Can he convince the world that he's a serious leader? Or will this summit become yet another humiliation, sealing his fate as one of the weakest Labour leaders in history? As expected, the media wasted no time in tearing Starmer apart. Even the usually Labour-friendly outlets couldn't ignore this humiliation. The Guardian, which has consistently backed Starmer, published a lukewarm defense, but the reality was clear: this was a disaster. The Telegraph called it a catastrophic diplomatic failure. The Daily Mail branded Starmer as Britain's most embarrassing opposition leader. And on social media, it was even worse. Political commentators, both left and right, ridiculed Starmer's arrogance. His attempt to align with the Democrats had backfired spectacularly. Piers Morgan slammed him as a lightweight who got played, while conservative analysts laughed at his desperate attempts to get Trump's attention. But the worst part? Even Labour supporters were questioning whether Starmer was truly fit to lead. Labour's history of failed leaders. Is Starmer next? If there's one thing Labour has mastered over the years, it's choosing leaders who collapse under pressure. Let's take a quick look back, because history might just be repeating itself. Remember Ed Miliband, the man who was supposed to modernize Labour and take them back to power? He flopped so hard in 2015 that the Tories crushed him in the election, and he resigned immediately. What about Jeremy Corbyn, the far-left darling who claimed to be the future of British politics? He led Labour to its worst defeat since 1935, leaving the party in complete ruins. And now here we are with Starmer, another leader who was promised to be the one to fix Labour, but is now on the brink of complete failure. The pattern is painfully clear. Labour keeps picking leaders who look good on paper but crumble when it really matters. Starmer started strong with media hype and party support, only to get exposed as weak, indecisive, and disconnected from voters. He suffered a massive humiliation that proved he isn't fit for the job, lost the trust of the public and his own party, and will likely be forced out, just like the rest. So the question is Starmer just another name on Labour's long list of failed leaders, or can he somehow break the cycle? Based on what we've just seen, the answer seems pretty obvious. Behind the scenes, the mood inside Labour HQ was one of sheer panic. Senior Labour figures knew this wasn't just a PR disaster, this was a moment that could define Starmer's leadership. Whispers of discontent grew louder. Some MPs, particularly from the party's left wing, saw this as the perfect opportunity to begin plotting against him. Angela Rayner, Starmer's deputy, has remained suspiciously quiet. Could she be positioning herself as an alternative leader? Many within Labour believe she has been waiting for a moment like this to strike. Then there's the old guard, figures like Ed Miliband and Yvette Cooper, who see Starmer as a weak leader who lacks charisma. Even those who once defended him are now privately admitting maybe Starmer isn't the right man for the job. And here's where things get even more dangerous for him: if Labour MPs sense that Starmer is losing credibility with voters, they won't hesitate to turn on him. The party has a long history of ruthlessly dumping leaders who appear weak. If Starmer's position starts collapsing, the knives will be out. If there's one thing the British public hates, it's weakness, and Starmer now looks weaker than ever. His inability to command respect on the global stage is making voters question whether he can handle the pressure of being Prime Minister. Polls conducted after the Trump snub show a sharp drop in Starmer's approval ratings in key battleground areas. Traditional Labour voters are expressing concerns. One lifelong Labour supporter in Birmingham said, "I wanted to believe in Starmer, but he's just not strong enough. Another in Manchester said he had one job: to look like a leader. This sentiment is growing, and it's creating a dangerous opening for the Conservatives and Reform UK. Rishi Sunak may have his own problems, but at least he's managed to maintain relationships with global leaders. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage is seizing this opportunity, presenting himself as the only British politician with real influence in Washington. The Tory strategy is to use Starmer's failure to their advantage. The Conservative Party knows exactly how to exploit this disaster. Expect them to hammer home the message that Starmer is unfit to lead. Their attack ads practically write themselves: if Starmer can't handle Trump, how can he handle Putin? Britain deserves a leader respected on the world stage, not ignored. And here's where it gets even worse for Starmer: this blunder could influence the next general election. Britain is at a crossroads with the economy struggling, immigration rising, and geopolitical tensions escalating. Voters want a strong leader, and Starmer just proved he isn't one. Now, let's think long-term. If Trump wins the next US election in 2024, Starmer will be in serious trouble. The UK needs a good relationship with the US, and if Trump returns to the White House, he will remember exactly who stood against him. That means Starmer, if he ever becomes Prime Minister, could face a hostile US administration. Britain would be at a severe disadvantage, all because Starmer foolishly picked a side in a battle that wasn't his. Meanwhile, Farage would likely be Trump's closest British ally, giving him massive political influence. So, what happens next? Does Starmer attempt damage control? Does Labour try to rally around him? Or is this the beginning of the end for his leadership? One thing is clear: this is a moment that will define Starmer's political career. Either he finds a way to rebuild his credibility, or he fades into obscurity like so many failed Labour leaders before him. But if this disaster has proven anything, it's that Britain cannot afford weak leadership. Whether it's dealing with the US, handling Brexit, or standing up to global threats, we need a leader who commands respect, not one who stammers on live television. And that brings us back to the ultimate question: is Keir Starmer finished? There's no sugarcoating it: Starmer is in deep trouble. His leadership is crumbling, his international standing is in ruins, and his party is losing faith in him. So, what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Starmer? Can he recover, or is Labour doomed under his leadership? Let us know in the comments, and remember, Starmer doesn't want you to know all this. That's why you should like this video, subscribe now, and turn on notifications, because trust me, this is just the beginning.